Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Melanie Parrish. It's so great to be here with you live today on the Experimental Leader podcast. It's election day in the United States. And as a dual citizen, I'm voting for the second time this month. So I voted in a municipal election in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and my candidate didn't win, but somebody I knew who I loved voted for the candidate that did win, and I felt strangely comforted by that. I didn't feel like I had to get it all right. I felt like it was okay that someone I cared for picked a different candidate. In that case, I really wasn't sure who I wanted to vote for. And I know sometimes we're more sure, but I think there's a leadership place around elections right now in the world. I think there's, as a systems worker and someone who is thinking about what's trying to happen in the world, I'm super curious. I know there's some elections where my candidate, the person who speaks exactly for me, wins, and that feels really good. And then there's sometimes where a candidate who doesn't speak for me wins, and it feels kind of bad. And I've been very curious about, like, what is it that someone else sees? What is it? I'm really committed to democracy above even my own opinion. I really believe in democracy. And so today, as I vote, as election results are coming in, I'm curious about what's trying to happen in the world and whose voice we're trying to hear. And I'm just super curious about that. I'm also going to vote because I hope it's my voice, and I hope it's your voice, and I hope it's everyone's voice. But I know that it can't be everyone's voice. That's sort of the other part of democracy. It can't always be everyone's voice in a consensus model or some kind of other model. There's ways to hear people's voices. And I've been thinking a lot about just dialogue in general. I was hanging out with a couple of 80-year-old Baptists this weekend, and I was really curious to hear their thoughts. And they were very reticent to share them because you wouldn't want to talk politics. That's not a good idea. And I think that we've gotten in the habit of not talking to each other because we might have differences. And I want to continue to embrace differences, to have difficult conversations. And I want to just say that for myself, one of my places of leadership is to have difficult conversations where differences are not difficult for me. I want to be able to hear things that are not my ideas repeated over and over again. Anyway, I'm really excited about our show today. And we're going to talk more about relationships, I think. I am really excited to have Claudia Aronowitz on my show. She's a personal development and relationship coach. She also works with people in leadership, and she's passionate about helping people feel good with their whole self and helping them to create strong and positive relationships with others. Claudia, I'm super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And well, I would love to know how you are experimenting in your life and work right now.
I am experimenting by just doing things that feel scary and just doing them anyhow, without any attachment to the results. So I'm reaching out to people to be in their podcast, wanting to write for others, and I'm just reaching out regardless of the outcome. And that's an interesting experiment.
And why? Why are you reaching out? What is it that has this be the time for you to reach out?
Because I think over the years I've gained a lot of expertise that are very useful for others. And it was just the fear of, is it good enough, that it wasn't permitting me to just start saying it and writing about it and saying, my thoughts are interesting. You may disagree with them, which is perfectly fine. You may not, but I have something to say.
Oh, that's great. And what do you think is the most important thing for people to think about when they're trying to improve relationships in their lives? How do they create more peaceful, sincere, harmonious relationships in their lives?
I was hearing your introduction and you talked about curiosity about what the other person and why is it that they think that way? And that's to me one of the most important tools. I like to call it like my curious hat on. It's just having conversations and be willing to be surprised. Doesn't mean you have to agree. You can still have your own position. But what happens if you can really listen to see why they're thinking that way or whatever's happening, instead of listening to respond? And that's why I was hearing you. I'm like, yes, curiosity. If other people could have curiosity, the world would be so different.
Well, I think it's so true that we often listen and we're thinking, our first, I meet someone, and often, for me, it's somebody who has a more right-wing perspective. These are the people that I have to really work to be curious about. But I start to listen for what I disagree with instead of what I agree with, or listen for, where there might be offense or where I might need to walk away or protect myself. And when it comes down to it, if I listen for alignment or I listen for ideas, they have interesting ideas, and it can just be a really interesting dialogue.
I've learned over the years now that I can acknowledge what I'm hearing, and it doesn't mean I have to agree. And that the moment that the other side can feel listened and heard, they're also more willing now to not only give me their position, but to try to understand mine. And then we can walk away and totally disagree. But I need to acknowledge, so what I'm hearing you say is that, this is what you're going to be voting for because that's important to you. Okay, I disagree. I'm going to vote exactly the opposite than you do. But I'm acknowledging that that's what I think I'm hearing you say. And it's amazing if I do that, how suddenly maybe the other side might be willing to listen then to my opinion. And we still disagreed, but at least we learned something from each other.
Okay, now I want to play devil's advocate for
Yes, go for it.
I want your expertise on this because there's a couple of places where I'm really good at this. Lots of places where I can be curious. And then there's places where I don't do so well. So my family is an LGBTQ family. And that's one of the places that I can't just agree to disagree. And so that's one of the places where if somebody starts to say, they don't want my family to have equal rights, or they don't want my, queer marriage or whatever it is, I don't want to hear that. I'm not interested in that. So how do I do that in a workplace environment, or how do I keep myself safe? Because this is my identity. We're not just talking about an idea. We're actually talking about identity. And I'm not just talking about for me, but others as well. How do people keep themselves safe and also not continue to be open?
So first of all, is we have topics that trigger us because they're important to us. They're part of it. Like you say, my values, my identity, and I'm going to protect them because this is who I am. And it's perfectly fine. So one of the things that I like to say is, and I have a boundary. If I feel you're attacking me, I believe it's okay to say, you know what, I'm having a really hard time having this conversation because this is who I am. And you're attacking me personally with my values, but I still want to be curious. The other people just can't take that because it's only I took everything, they were trying to push onto me. And I can say, look, I'm hearing you, and this is how it's affecting me because this is my identity. And it's very hard for me to hear that my life is less important than yours. Can I? And then from there, we continue the conversation. I do believe that I can be curious and set boundaries. If you're attacking to me or you're yelling at me, I can easily say, I want to hear you. But if that tone of voice, I'm going to walk away because I'm not able to hear you. Not attacking you, but I will not engage in a conversation when somebody else is yelling at me. And we all have the areas where we're allowed to say, unless we change the tone, I'm not going to learn about you and you're not going to learn about me. And we still live in the same place.
Mm. Yeah, I think these are interesting places. And I think, I think that we've gone a little too far into those areas. Like, oh, your ideas are different than mine. Let's not talk about it. So I do think we should be expanding again. And I think it's important that people do also have ways to keep themselves safe.
I think that when we talk about curiosity, I heard somebody once say that it's like double clicking in Google. If we only stay in our positions and we say we're curious, we're not really curious because we're talking about a position. The interesting conversation is never about the positions. If I do an essential conversation or remediation, I try to get so curious they forget their position, whatever they were fighting about or what they're discussing, because the interesting exchange of ideas where solutions might be possible is always underneath that position. So it's more about asking, so what makes you think about that? What is your values? Why do you think that if I have this type of life, what is it affecting you? What is it changing about you? And we almost completely forget the initial topic and we start talking about the things that are important to them. And that's when it's easier to have the conversation.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think one of the great privileges of being a coach and being, actively in someone's life is if they say something, I get to clarify. I get to say, oh, what do you mean by that? And go deeper with them. And what do you mean by that? And just to keep, peeling back the skin of the onion until I get to something in the middle that's really different than what I thought I might have heard at the beginning. It isn't as and as you peel back the layers, you find so much more similarity of thought than difference of thought. Everybody loves their family. Everybody, values safety for their family. There's so many themes that are exactly the same as you peel things back to the essence of it.
And to me, it's also about finding the common problem because sometimes we're even discussing not the common problem. I had a conversation before the pandemic with one of my clients. She kept on saying, as an organization, they won't let our people work from home because one of the leaders doesn't want to. Now it sounds ridiculous, but it was very important to her at the moment. And they kept on arguing. And I challenged her to say, find out why he's against it. I don't think it's about working from home. When she got curious, she came back and said he didn't know how to keep people accountable if he could see what they were doing. So we changed the whole conversation around accountability and how do we keep our people accountable and what does it mean accountability? And as we were walking out, we just said, oh, he just looked around and said, oh, by the way, I have no problem having people work from home. Because the whole conversation centered around something that was a common problem that we both could discuss, regardless of our differences.
I do think it's kind of ironic that accountability is actually an issue right now after people have all gone home.
This was some time ago, but it was such an amazing idea of conversation.
No, I hear you. I think it's been such an interesting time because so many people were committed to so many things, and it's hard to know. Now people are going back to the status quo. My doctor just went back to not doing phone appointments. And I was like, that was such a good thing. That worked so well. What else should people be thinking about as they are creating peaceful actually have a different question. I have a better question for you. As a leader, how do you foster creative, peaceful, harmonious relationships in your team?
I think it's in your team and in your families. To me, with relationships between humans, doesn't matter where we're standing. And we talked before we got on the call about imperfect and how you do it live because it can be imperfect. I think one of them is by showing up with our imperfections and not trying to show up as perfect and I know everything. Because you're imperfect, I'm imperfect, and every other human being is imperfect. And that's perfectly fine. And to me, the second one is the concept that we need to have more conflict. We need to have more conversations. By not engaging in uncomfortable conversations, we lose the ability to know each other. We lose the ability to find the common solution. We lose the ability to think differently. And we've been, for so many reasons, maybe that could be a whole area. Why am I only seeing now one side of the equation? People are very uncomfortable with conflict. There's nothing wrong with a conversation that makes us uncomfortable. It's how we manage it later. I can be very respectful and still be able to look at you in the eye and be very uncomfortable with the conversation we're having. And that's fine. It's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's I think that being able to go deeper into what's not working, to negotiate through problems, we sort of walk up and we touch it and then we run away really quickly. We want it to be harmonious without knowing how to dive in and do the work.
Harmonious becomes because we've learned how to have discussions. It's not because it's always harmonious. I actually think that if somebody comes and says to me, I have the best relationship, we never disagree, I think it's a superficial and not a good relationship. Because if you're really going to go deep and have the conversations that are needed, there's going to be times that it's going to be an uncomfortable, difficult conversation. Nothing wrong with them. They're part of it. I like to say you can have very difficult conversations in a very nice tone of voice. And they're still difficult because they trigger either you or me for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess the invitation is let's not run on subjects that make us uncomfortable. I don't have to be in there completely. I invite you to have a little bit more of curiosity, a little bit more of encounter. And then if you need to walk away, if it's too triggering, but at least keep the door open.
And how can people find you?
They can go to my website. It's claudiaaro.com. And I would be happy. I write a blog every month on these topics because I'm passionate about it. And I would love them to get in touch and learn more about how to create this better, stronger, imperfect relationships.
What are some of your blog topics? I'd love to hear a little bit about your blog.
I've talked about my favorite words and how my favorite words, some of them are the word and the word no. I think no is a very positive word, actually, and I write about that. I've talked about silence and how using a few seconds of silence is such an inviting technique to let the other person speak. We're scared of silence, so we catch on to them. And I'm like, no, silence is great. It means the other person's thinking what to say. Give them a chance to decide what they have to say. I only write about things that I believe in our control. I talk a lot about, knowing what you want to say. I have people that say, I want to feel respected or acknowledged, and when I ask them, okay, so what does the other person need to do? What are the behaviors they need to do for you to feel that way? They go blank. And they say, I don't know, that's the other person's problem. And I'm like, well, no, it's yours. Because if we want the other person to understand us, then we need to tell them exactly what we need.
That's awesome. It's been great to have you here today.
My pleasure.
It's been really great to have you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for your book. I really enjoyed it. And for having me as your guest.
Oh, well, it's been such a nice time. And well, I wish you all the best of luck out there working with all the people who are deepening their relationships.
And the best of luck to all of us.
If you'd like to get a digital copy of my book, The Experimental Leader, Be a New Kind of Boss to Cultivate an Organization of Innovators, you can go to www.book.experimentalleader.com and you can get your very own copy for just $4.95. I want this book in your hands, so I've made it really cost effective so that you can start reading it right away. Go now so you can get started today and start to systematically improve your own leadership.
I wanted to read you just a little bit out of chapter 2. We're doing book club in November. We're doing chapter 2. We're doing book club this year. From The Experimental Leader, Be a New Kind of Boss to Cultivate an Organization of Innovators. Innovation, creativity, and reactivity. Most leaders assume their roles without a roadmap of any kind. They survive based on their innate abilities to think on their feet and learn on the job. Regardless, it's no secret that seasoned leaders repeatedly exhibit the same overlapping set of skills and practices: self-care, listening, emotional intelligence, and the ability to develop people over time. New leaders might not get to see these practices up close, however, as intentional mentoring and excellent models of business leadership are rare in any one leader's career. And because today's leaders work under constant pressure to innovate and disrupt, they sometimes end up using strategies and behaviors better suited to times of crisis than day-to-day wayfinding. It's been a real pleasure being here today with Claudia Aronowitz. I loved that she was talking about no as a word to learn. I often tell my clients that no is a 2-letter word that will change your life. I also challenge you to look for places that you can use no without explanation. So, we soften no sometimes for people by explaining all the reasons why we can't do it. I'm busy, I'm this. But I really challenge you this week to look for a place to say, no, I can't do that. And let it sit because it's incredibly powerful, because it allows you to sit with no being an option for no other reason than you choose it. That's my challenge to you this week. It's been great being with you here today on the Experimental Leader podcast. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.